welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
Always fun.
Yeah, and this one's going to be particularly fascinating. I think we're going to be diving into C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed.
Okay.
And I'm sure most of you guys out there listening, C.S. Lewis from the Chronicles of Narnia, right? Talking lions and all that.
Right. Fun stuff.
This book is really different.
Yeah. A little bit darker.
It's very different. Very different.
Quite a bit.
It's actually his personal journal, and it was written in the raw aftermath of his wife dying.
Wow.
Joy David Iman. She died of cancer. And Lewis was just devastated.
Of course, yeah.
And so this book, it's kind of a window into his mind as he tries to reconcile this immense grief with his faith.
I mean, you think about C.S. Lewis, this pillar of Christian thought, right?
Right.
To see him wrestling with this doubt and pain.
Yeah.
It's pretty powerful stuff.
And, whether you've experienced a loss like this yourself or not, I think there's something really universal in this book about, the human condition.
Yeah.
About faith, about the nature of love and loss.
Absolutely. And what's so striking about A Grief Observed is the sheer honesty of it. Lewis doesn't hold anything back.
That's raw.
He lays bare the messy, even ugly side of grief.
Yeah, he doesn't try to sugarcoat it or pretend it's this, beautiful spiritual experience. He talks about the doubt, the anger, the exhaustion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just the sheer rawness of it.
It's not your typical self-help book on grieving, is it?
Not at all.
One of the first things that just jumped out at me was Lewis saying that grief for him felt like fear.
More than sadness, yeah.
More than sadness, yeah.
And he even talks about physical symptoms like a fluttering stomach or constant yawning.
Like his body's in this fight or flight mode.
Exactly.
Which from a psychological perspective totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Lewis is describing a physiological response to trauma.
Right.
The body gets flooded with these stress hormones. And that leads to those visceral sensations he describes.
And it's interesting because he doesn't romanticize these feelings at all.
No, not one bit.
There's this one part where he even calls it the loathsome, sticky, sweet pleasure of indulging in self-pity.
He's really laying himself bare.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes this book so relatable.
Right.
It normalizes these complicated feelings that we might be ashamed to admit.
Totally.
Even to ourselves.
Yeah, and then there's this whole other layer to this where Lewis, this staunch defender of Christianity, starts to question his own faith.
Yeah, he talks about feeling like prayer is just hitting this wall.
Especially when he's praying for joy.
Yeah, it's like he's looking into an empty house.
Right.
Wondering if anyone's even home.
And he even says there are times where he feels like God has slammed the door in his face.
It's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Coming from C.S. Lewis.
Especially from C.S. Lewis.
And it gets to this core question in theology. The problem of pain. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why is there suffering?
Right. Why would he allow this to happen, especially to someone like Lewis who's devoted his life to his faith?
It's a question that has haunted humanity for centuries.
Yeah.
And we see Lewis wrestling with it in this very raw and personal way.
And for him, it's not some abstract philosophical debate.
Right.
He's living it, breathing it.
Every single day.
Every single day. And what's interesting is that he doesn't offer any easy answers.
No.
There's no platitudes about God's plan or anything like that.
All right.
He's just sharing his struggle.
His doubt.
His confusion.
Yeah. It's almost like he's inviting us to wrestle with these questions alongside him.
Yeah. So where do you stand on this?
Oh, God.
When you look at Lewis's struggle, does it resonate with you at all?
Yeah. I mean, his honesty is what's so compelling.
Yeah.
He's not pretending to have all the answers.
Right.
But he's also not afraid to ask the tough questions.
Yeah.
And I think it creates this space for us to examine our own beliefs, to acknowledge those doubts that we might otherwise try to suppress.
Absolutely. And he's so open about just how much his prayer life changed after Joy died.
Yeah.
He says praying for others was fine, but when it came to praying for Joy, it was like hitting a wall.
It's like the language of prayer. His understanding of God, it just felt inadequate in the face of his grief.
And for this renowned Christian thinker to admit that he can't even pray properly anymore.
It's pretty powerful.
It's pretty powerful. It takes a lot of courage, I think.
Yeah. I think it speaks to the universality of grief, whether you're a person of faith or not.
Right.
There's something about Lewis's experience that transcends any particular belief system.
Yeah.
It's about that fundamental human need to make sense of loss.
Right.
To find meaning in suffering.
And I think that's what makes A Grief Observed so powerful, right?
Absolutely.
It's not about easy answers or neatly packaged solutions.
No, it's about this messy, painful journey.
Yeah.
of grappling with grief, doubt, and the very nature of faith.
And that journey, it takes us to some pretty unexpected places, as we're going to see when we delve into how Lewis wrestled with memory and the fear of losing even the image of his beloved joy.
Yeah, that's a whole other layer to this story.
It is.
Yeah, that whole idea of memory is so fascinating, isn't it? Because Lewis goes really deep with that, too, in terms of grief. Like, he talks about this fear, of his memory of joy fading and their life together just becoming kind of blurry over time.
Like he's losing her all over again, but this time it's the memory of her,
Yep.
right? The essence of who she was.
Exactly, and that fear is almost as powerful as the grief itself.
He even talks about, feeling disgust at the thought of, sentimental grave tending,
Right.
But then he realizes that maybe engaging with those physical objects, like a tombstone or photograph, it's actually more honest.
Yeah.
Than just trying to hold onto those memories solely in his mind.
It's a fascinating insight into the nature of memory itself. Right?
Yeah.
We tend to think of memory as this fixed, unchanging thing.
Like a picture in an album.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But cognitive science tells us it's way more fluid, more like a reconstruction.
So you're saying our memories aren't necessarily accurate?
Not always, no.
They're colored by our present.
Yeah, by who we are now, our current emotional state, new experiences.
It almost feels like Lewis was onto this intuitively, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I think he realized that trying to hold on to this perfect image of joy in his mind,
right,
it was just preventing him from accepting the reality.
That she was gone and that his memory of her would change.
It's inevitable, right?
So that's why he found some solace in those physical acts of remembrance.
Yeah, like tending to a grave or looking at a photograph.
Right.
Those might seem sentimental on the surface, but they serve this deeper purpose.
They ground us in the present.
Yeah, they remind us that the person we lost isn't physically present anymore.
Makes you think about how we relate to our own memories,
Totally.
Are we clinging to these idealized versions of people?
Right.
Or are we letting those memories evolve as we change and grow?
That's a tough one, isn't it?
It is. And it kind of connects to what Lewis says about grief not being the end of love, but just a different phase of it.
Yeah, he even compares bereavement to a figure in a dance, like a necessary one.
Something that feels awkward and painful at first,
but ultimately makes the dance more beautiful, more complex.
It's a powerful analogy.
It really is, and I think it speaks to this transformative power of grief.
Right, like loss doesn't diminish love. It reshapes it.
Forces it to adapt and evolve in ways we never imagined.
And he's also kind of challenging those common platitudes we hear about the dead being at peace.
Right. He's very honest about the uncertainty.
He doesn't know what happens after death.
And he doesn't pretend to.
Which is kind of refreshing in a way, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, there's this stark contrast to those comforting narratives we hear about heaven.
But there's something really liberating in his honesty.
There is. He's not offering easy answers.
Right.
Just grappling with the unknowable.
And in doing so, he gives us permission to do the same.
He does, and it raises this question, Does certainty about the afterlife actually help or hinder the grieving process?
That's a big one, right?
It is a big one.
But for now, I want to shift gears a little and talk about something I found really mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Lewis describes this experience of joy's presence, but not in this sentimental way. Right. It's purely intellectual. He says it's like a telephone call.
Wow.
A connection of sheer intellects.
That's so different from what we typically associate with spiritual experiences.
Isn't it?
It really is. It speaks to his willingness to challenge conventional thinking.
Right. Even the realm of spirituality. Like, he's not describing this fluffy cloud reunion.
Right.
It's cerebral, almost jarring.
But there's a sense of wonder in his description.
He uses words like brisk, cheerful, even keen.
It's definitely not your grandma's vision of heaven.
Definitely not. And it makes you rethink your own assumptions about the afterlife. What do we even imagine it to be like? And does Lewis's experience challenge those notions, those comforting images? Makes you wonder, if we've got it all wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe heaven's not all fluffy clouds and harps.
Maybe not. I think Lewis is just opening our minds to other possibilities.
Right, like ways of connecting that we can't even comprehend right now.
Exactly. He's not offering proof, but he's not dismissing it either.
It's like he's saying, hey, I'm just sharing my experience.
Yeah, and letting us draw our own conclusions.
And I think that's the beauty of a grief observed.
It's not a book of answers, but a book of questions.
A journey of exploration.
Exactly, and he invites us to go on that journey with him.
To be open to the possibility that what we think we know might be completely wrong.
Which can be a scary thought for some people.
Yeah, but it can also be liberating.
Absolutely.
So when we step back and look at the whole arc of a grief observed, it's really a journey from despair to hope, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about acknowledging the pain, the doubt, the anger.
But then finding a way to move through it.
To find meaning even in the midst of loss.
And what strikes me is how honest Lewis is about the whole process.
Right. He doesn't shy away from the messiness of grief.
It's not this linear, step-by-step thing.
It can knock you down when you least expect it.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest takeaways for me was this idea of loving the real person.
Not the idealized image we create in our memories.
Yeah, accepting them, flaws and all.
Because that's what real love is.
Exactly. And it's not just about romantic love.
Now, it applies to all our relationships.
And speaking of challenging our perceptions, there's this line near the end that really stuck with me. Lewis says that God is the great iconoclast.
Now, for folks who don't speak theologian, what does that even mean?
Basically, it means God breaks down our idols.
Okay.
He shatters those comfortable images and beliefs that we cling to.
So true faith requires us to be open to having our beliefs challenged.
Even broken, yeah.
That's a tough one.
It is, but maybe that's the point, right?
Maybe the real question isn't whether God exists or not.
But whether we're willing to let go of our limited understanding of who or what God might be.
And that question goes beyond religion, I think.
Totally.
It's about being open to the unknown, embracing uncertainty.
Allowing ourselves to be transformed by experiences that challenge our worldview.
And recognizing that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Absolutely. And I think we've just scratched the surface of A Grief Observed today.
Yeah, there's so much more to unpack.
It's one of those books that really stays with you.
It can comfort you, challenge you.
It makes you think about life and death in a whole new way.
And ultimately, I think it helps us live more honestly and more fully.
To embrace both the joy and sorrow that life throws at us.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So we'll leave you with this. What belief or image might you need to let go of? What comfortable assumption might need shattering in order for you to find something truer, something more real?
That's something to ponder, isn't it?
It is, and maybe A Grief Observed can be a guide on that journey.
Or any of Lewis's work, really. He was a master of making us think.
Until next time, keep diving deep.